So we have to choose optimizations, which ones to prioritize. It so turns out not all optimizations are equal. Some optimizations that apply to loops, they are very important. Can someone guess why is that so? Especially when you are targeting speed ups, optimizations that apply to loops are very important.
Since there is a change of block in loops, like
change of blocks. I'm not just talking about unrolling. Any optimization, if you are improving the code within a loop, it's very good.
That code runs a lot of times.
Absolutely, as simple as that, Rupanshu. Very good. Loop means it's likely that the code will run many times. If you have made some changes or made some improvements which are being encountered often, then naturally you will realize more performance benefits. Is that fine? Abhinav Garg? Are we fine so far? Are we on the same page?
Yeah.
Okay. Similarly, optimizations, low-level optimizations like instruction scheduling and register allocation. We will cover that in another session. I think Professor Govind will cover part of it. They are also very important because they impact memory accesses significantly. Okay. The choice of optimizations can also depend on the input program. For example, let's say you have an object-oriented program that you are compiling. Inlining is very important. Can someone say why inlining is important for object-oriented programs? Very important.
Maybe because when you generate code for O programs, you have a lot of virtual tables and pointers to methods.
Mm-hmm.
If you inline them, you lose that level of indirection. Maybe that's
not saying it's important. You seem to be saying we shouldn't inline, though I don't agree with. I don't understand your logic, but I understood your conclusion as we should not inline.
No, we should inline because if we have a table to pointers to functions and we are choosing, if we inline the function, maybe we don't have to go through that pointer reference.
So you're saying if we are able to inline, we can avoid virtual table lookup and all that.
Yeah,
fair
exactly.
Enough. Anything else? There's one more supremely simple logic or reason behind this.
So is it because of the inheritance that we get some variables from the parent classes? So there we need to.
How is inlining helping?
I mean, with the scope.
So let me explain. Maybe I should have explained what is function inlining. So what is function inlining? Let us say I have a function a.foo. I'm calling somewhere. Okay. What I will do, I'll replace this call with the whole body of foo here. Okay. So there was a statement S1, foo S2. I'll replace it with S1, the body of foo followed by S2. So this is called function inlining. And I'm saying this inlining is very important for object-oriented programs. One answer given by, I think, Rupanshu is that in object-oriented programs, whenever you want to make a function call, you need to resolve the function by looking up on the virtual table. And that takes time. And if we inline it, if we are able to inline it, we are avoiding the lookup at runtime, which is good. Perfect. But there is one more very fundamental reason.
So usually in object-oriented programming, we end up making so many functions that do very simple tasks like returning a value. So if we inline,
my get functions, my put functions, and all that, right? Which are kind of very simple functions. Correct? Mahesh?
Yes, sir.
Right. And as you know, function calls are expensive. Can someone say why function calls are expensive?
We have to we are changing the context. Like we have to push some variables, like save some values.
Correct. So
We also do a branch. Like we have to go to
how
different
many
place.
branches I'm doing?
We have to go to a place
To
and
go.
then we have to return back.
Return. Very good. So if I am inside a function bar in which I am calling a function foo, I have to kind of save whatever I'm doing here, go to foo, that is a jump, do whatever in foo, and then clean up my things, what I've done on foo, and then come back. So inlining is expensive. And I'm sorry, function calls are expensive. So if I'm able to inline simple functions, there are similarly leaf routine optimizations. We'll talk about it later. Okay. Similarly, if it is a recursive function, if I can avoid jumps and replace the avoid the calls with jumps, that's good. Can I turn recursion into loops? That would be cool too, right? So it depends a lot on the input program, what type of optimization you are choosing. Was there a question? No?
So will it be kind of correct to say that inline functions basically perform let's say context specific optimization if we use it in the context of object oriented programming?
What do you mean by context specific optimizations?
So depending on what is the current context that you're calling the function with, whether you're calling it with specific parameters or specific values, so accordingly it may do optimization when you are doing inlining of a function.
Yes, it will inline based on the arguments play roles. Sometimes the function body itself, if it is too big, I will not inline because of this iCache issues and so on. We'll talk more about this inlining towards the end of today's lecture. But yes, we don't blindly inline. Any other question? Okay. We will quickly, we are going with an overview of optimizations currently. So we will also talk about types of optimizations. You can classify these optimizations into 3 categories based on their scope. Local, within a basic block. Can someone tell what's a basic block?
A straight line piece of code where you can only enter at the beginning and exit, like jump at the end.
Come out of the basic block at the end. Perfect. So I may think of optimizations within a basic block. I can do within a function. I can do across functions. Intra-procedural, inter-procedural. Okay. I can also classify these optimizations based on their positioning. High-level optimizations, low-level optimizations. What is this high-level optimization? With high-level optimizations, they use the program structure. Things like loops, functions, classes. Okay. That structure is visible and we want to optimize based on the structure. I can do optimizations which are low level, which work on low level IR, where I don't look at, hey, what's the structure, what's the class, what's the loop. I may do optimizations which are independent of that, independent of the program structure. Both are important. We will, today's lecture, we will look at high level optimizations. I can also classify the optimization based on their dependence on the target machine. Machine independent, machine dependent. Machine independent means it's independent of the machine, but is applicable across broad range of. It's independent of machine, so it's applicable across broad range of machines. I can be specific for a language. For all languages, these optimizations, they are independent of the machine. For example, moving code to a less frequently executed place. Let us say you have a loop. You have a loop, let us say. There is some code S. Let's say the code is saying A equal to 5. If I move this code outside the loop, it's good. It's machine independent. Moving it outside the loop most likely will give me good performance. Removing unreachable code or redundant code is also good. These are all machine independent. You can similarly do machine dependent optimizations which capitalize on machine specific properties. It may replace a sequence of instructions with a specific instruction available on that particular machine. Mapping IR to the machine code. They are all machine dependent optimizations. So we looked at three different classifications, right? Local, intra-procedural, inter-procedural, high level, low level, machine independent, machine dependent. At this high level, do you have any questions? We'll soon go into more specific optimizations.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Pranav?
The virtual machine that Java uses to generate bytecode, does it use the machine dependent approach or machine independent?
Okay, what does Java do? It takes in Java, when you compile, you take a .java code, you generate .class file, correct? This you use using Java C. And then you invoke Java, which is the interpreter, and can also have an internal compiler within, which will execute the code, right? So what's your question now, Pranav? Can you repeat?
Does it use machine dependent optimization because it runs across different architectures?
When you say does it, can you be more specific on what is this it you are referring to?
The virtual machine, the Java virtual machine.
In Java, the compilation can happen at multiple stages. So this is one stage, which is called a static compilation, which generates .class file. Then you have the Java, which is a virtual machine, which can interpret the bytecode. So this .class or the bytecode. While interpreting, it may find that certain piece of code is executed heavily, and it may generate machine code for it. Okay? And even there, we will have both machine independent and machine dependent optimizations. So when you compile a code, we will first do some machine independent optimizations and then do machine dependent optimizations and then get the machine code. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other question? Good question, Pranav. We have a lot of students who haven't spoken yet. Let me randomly pick some. Nitesh Jangid. Are we fine so far? Are we on the same page? You may unmute and speak. Shivam Sinha, are we on the same page?
Yes, sir, you are on the same page. Sir, I have one question.
Yes, Nitesh.
Like how traditional, that compiler is different than just-in-time compilation available with the JVM?
All right. Nitesh, it's a very good question. I want to do justice to this, but I'll do one thing. I'll hold it off until the end. So at the end, I'll try to leave some 10-15 minutes where we'll ask all such questions.
Okay, sir. Yeah.
There are optimizations which are common between two. There are things that JIT compiler can do that a normal compiler cannot. There are things that a normal compiler does that a JIT compiler doesn't. Look, I'm using my words carefully. It's not that the JIT compiler cannot do what a normal compiler does. I said the JIT compiler doesn't do some things that a normal static compiler does. Okay. But there are a lot of things that both of them do in common. Whatever we talk will be applicable to both, but there are things which are different. We'll come to it towards the end, because otherwise it's a fairly interesting topic. We may get seriously digressed, and Professor Ramakrishna may not appreciate it. Okay, we'll come to it definitely, Nitesh. Remind me towards the end, okay? Anupam, any questions so far?
No, yes, we are on the same page.
Okay, good. Let's continue. See here, it's not that always looking at an optimization, we can distinguish it's machine dependent or independent. I mean, let us say there's a multiply instruction, a equal to a times 5. I replace with a equal to a times 4 and a equal to a plus 1, and then I replace it with a equal to a left shift by 2 and and increment a plus plus, right? This can be done both in the high kind of machine independent and dependent both. Okay, because this looks like something that most machines do, so sometimes we do it in the machine independent optimizations. So it's not always very clear. There are some optimizations like register allocation, instruction scheduling, they are clearly machine dependent. Function inlining, loop unrolling, they are clearly machine independent, but not always. Okay. What are the properties of optimizations? It should be as good as an assembly written program by a programmer. It should give me robust performance, predictable performance. It should exploit all the architectural strengths. It should hide all the architectural weaknesses. It should take advantage and support all the language features. The compilation should be super fast, right? However, most compilers, most optimizations that don't have any of the desirable properties. Okay. What do I mean by that? Our compiled code is not the same as the most optimum code written by a programmer. It may not be robust. I may not be fully exploiting the architectural strengths. I may not be super fast and so on. Okay. So what we do, we try to meet some of these goals, not all of them. We cannot. A typical optimizing compiler, what we want that it should be semantically equivalent. Okay, it should be semantically equivalent. And for this, we need to analyze the code. Okay, there are different types of program analysis that we will need. I mean, let us say I will ask a simple question: if condition A equal to blah, B equal to blah, else A equal to blah, B equal to blah. I'll ask this question: which of the variables may be assigned? A may be assigned, B may be assigned, C may also be assigned, since I do not know the value of the condition. Which of the variables, if I ask, which variable is guaranteed to be assigned? You will say that A is guaranteed to be assigned irrespective of the condition. Okay? So this is there is a difference, may analysis and must analysis. May analysis says the analysis holds on at least one data flow path. Must analysis says it must hold on all data flow paths. Okay? Is this brief idea of may and must clear so far? We'll take more examples when we do loop optimizations and so on. Oh yeah, Ramakrishna says it's break time. Let me see if it is a good time to break or Ramakrishna, I'll just take one example and stop in 2 minutes. Yeah. So let's take an example. Let us say I have an example foo, example called the function foo, where my goal is to replace all constant expressions with their constant literals. For example, here I have I equal to 1. So what do you think will be the value of I here? Clearly 1. Okay? If I equal to 1, then I know that I can replace this with 1. So I can write it as j equal to 2. In both the branches, j is equal to 2. So I can make it as a equal to 2. J equal to 2. So it is k equal to a sub 2. So I know that a sub 2 is not changing. So I can write it as k equal to 2. So I can write it as return 2. Right? So I can kind of, take this code and find out what is the value of I across all branches. What is the value of j across all branches? Is it changing? And now I want to say, what is the value of j across these two branches, irrespective of the branch taken. Irrespective of the branch taken, value of j is 2. So I can make it as 2. So you can see that I can replace this code with simply foo, irrespective of the value of b, I may return 2. Okay? But I may need these three statements because this is some array. So this code will also be there. I don't need the if-then. So there is a separate session on constant propagation. But what I'm trying to tell you is, remember, we are trying to say what is the value of j irrespective of the branch taken. Okay?
I had a question.
Mhm.
Like, so basically first it figure out that in the else part the j value is 2.
Correct.
And then it figures out like in both the branches of if and an else j remains 2, and then it like concatenates like just like j is 2.
Yeah. Instead of concatenates, I use a word called merges the information.
Okay.
Okay. And the reason why I said merges is that the instructor who will teach you constant propagation will say merging the information from this part and that part. But for us, we are talking about analysis. We are staying at that level of abstraction and say we are analyzing the code and deciding and realizing that value of j remains constant. Okay?